Hello everyone, and welcome to the Indiana Farmers Union talk on food safety. And we're going to talk about a very specific question today. My name is Nathan Boone. I'm a produce grower and a food safety consultant to the Indiana Farmers Union. And we're very happy today to have with us Tari Gary from the Indiana State Department of Agriculture. And she is the outreach coordinator for the Safe Produce Indiana. And we're going to talk about the question of, are you qualified? Are you covered? And if so, what records do you need to keep? Tari, thanks so much for joining us today. Can you please tell us a little bit about your work and who you are, and also your favorite vegetable?
All right, thanks, Nathan. As Nathan said, my name is Tari. In my role at ISDA, I aim to connect Indiana produce growers with the Safe Produce Indiana program, which aims to educate Hoosier produce growers about the FSMA Produce Safety Rule and produce safety best practices. So my focus is primarily outreach, but I also assist Purdue Extension with produce safety education in the state. The Indiana Department of Health, they're the third piece of the Safe Produce Indiana program, and they are the ones that do the regulatory enforcement of the FSMA Produce Safety Rule in Indiana. So the way this fits into the Indiana State Department of Agriculture, so ISDA's mission is to support growth in Indiana agriculture by serving as an advocate at the local, state, and federal levels, defining and nurturing economic opportunity in the food, fuel, and fiber sectors, and enhancing the stewardship of natural resources on agricultural land. So I would say my favorite vegetable is probably romaine lettuce.
Oh, wow, good call. That's one of my favorite too. I'm really into okra right now. I know that makes me, some people stop talking to me when I tell them that, but it's the only vegetable that you can pick standing up. And that's part of the reason I like it, but I also like the way it tastes. Okay, let's jump into this flow chart, which is going to talk about, are you covered or not? A lot of people have seen this, but honestly, since I've been working for the Indiana Farmers Union and talking to farms all over the state, I find that everybody's a little bit confused about, are they covered or not covered? Are they qualified, exempt or not? How much money do they have to make and all that? So we're going to go through this really quickly, and we're going to get to the bottom of this to find out if you're qualified, exempt, and then we're going to pivot to the question of, what records do you have to keep and what do you have to do if you are qualified exempt? Because again, a lot of growers have questions on that, and they're trying to do a lot of different things. So Tari, would you mind kind of walking us through this sheet and telling us what's what?
Absolutely. So this flow chart does help you kind of direct yourself to figure out, is your farm covered by FSMA or is it not? So the first question on here is pretty straightforward. Does your farm grow, harvest, pack, or hold produce? Chances are, if you're going through this flow chart, you probably are doing one of these things. So we'll go down to the next question. Does your farm on average in the previous 3 years have $25,000 or less in annual produce sales? And actually we use an inflation adjusted number there. So that new inflation number is $28,561 for 2018, 2019, and 2020. So if your total produce sales, and here we're just talking about produce, if it's less than that number, then your farm is not covered by the FSMA Produce Safety Rule. So pretty easy there. So let's say you are above that number with produce sales. And that can be any produce, whether that is what we call rarely consumed raw produce or what we call covered produce, which could be, tomatoes or anything that would be consumed raw. Let's say that you are above that number. We'll go down to the next few questions. We'll say that you are growing things that are not rarely consumed raw. So let's say you're growing tomatoes or cucumbers. Then we'll go down to the next question of, is your produce for personal or on-farm consumption? And we'll say, no, it's not. You are actually selling some of the produce into commerce. So then we can go down to this next question of, is your produce intended for commercial processing that adequately reduces pathogens, for example, a kill step? So here we're talking about, a good example would be if you are growing tomatoes for a company that makes ketchup or salsa. And if you are not doing that, if your produce is going to be consumed raw, then we'll go no, and we'll go down to the next question. And this is what we're going to focus on in this tech talk. And this is one of the qualified exemption questions. So does your farm, on average, in the previous 3 years, have less than $500,000 annual food sales? So here we're talking about food. And a majority of the food by value sold is direct to qualified end users.
What does that mean?
So we're going to give some definitions around that because we're talking about a lot of different things here. So that first question, are you less than $500,000 annual food sales? So notice we're no longer just talking about produce. Now we're talking about food. So that is going to include your produce, of course, but it's also going to include anything else that you're selling on your farms that a human or animal could eat. So this could be things like meat or eggs, any processed product like jams or jellies, any bakery products, if you have like an on-farm bakery like some of our farms do, snack foods, and also things that animals can eat as well, so animal feed. And the FDA considers corn and soybeans and grain, wheat, all of those things are considered animal feed. So you have to total up your total food sales. And if you are above $500,000 annually, then you are automatically covered by the rule. So let's say you're below that $500,000. So then you also have to meet the second criteria in order to be eligible for a qualified exemption. So a majority of the food sold by value is direct to qualified end users. So a qualified end user could be a consumer of the food. So if you are selling at, let's say, a farmer's market or a roadside stand or a CSA, all of those things would fall into this category. And also, another piece of this is it could be a restaurant or a retail food establishment that's located in the same state or less than 275 miles from the farm. So if you're selling to any of those entities, that would also be considered a qualified end user, and you would be eligible for that qualified exemption. So you do have to meet both of those criteria in order to be eligible.
Okay, great. Tari, thank you so much. So really a lot of the growers that I've talked to that are members and also people that contact me to get food safety consulting are in this category where they are primarily selling directly to their consumers, their farmers market, CSAs, farm stands, subscription services, you name it, maybe some restaurants, very few. I mean, there's some that are doing wholesale, but really not that much. So most of the farms that I know about are falling in this category of a qualified exemption. So what I'd like to do is pivot from here and really talk about what records. So now that you know this, what records do you have to keep? Because the state is starting to do more inspections of smaller and smaller farms. It's been a trend that's been happening. And I've found the state to be really helpful and really engaging and educational in their approach. And that's why I'm excited to talk about this, because it's a way for farmers to get the technical assistance and the help that they need. But could you tell us what records are needed? And I'll switch to that slide while you start.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, the Indiana Department of Health, so that's the state, they are the ones that are doing inspections of covered farms, and then they'll also be doing qualified exemption reviews for those farms that do fall into that qualified exemption category. So there are two different pieces to the requirements here that they're going to want to see that you're doing. First of all, you have the modified labeling requirement, which is section 112.6 of the Produce Safety Rule. So basically what that says is when you are selling your produce, your packaging has to have the name and business address of the farm where that produce was grown on the labeling. Now, a lot of times you don't have labeling on all of your produce, especially if you're selling somewhere like a farmer's market or something. So you have to, you must prominently and conspicuously display at the point of purchase name and complete the business address of the farm where the produce was grown on a label, poster, sign, or placard. So that is the text of the produce safety rule. Pretty straightforward. You just have to have some kind of signage saying where that produce was grown. So once you have those modified labeling requirements, then we can jump into the documentation, which there's a lot more going on there. So let me see here. So section 112.7 talks about those records to establish eligibility for a qualified exemption. So what that text of the produce safety rule says is records such as receipts must demonstrate the farm satisfies the criteria for a qualified exemption. This includes a written record reflecting that the grower has performed an annual review and verification of the farm's continued eligibility for the qualified exemption. Receipts must be dated, but no signature is required. The annual review verifying the farm's qualified exemption must be reviewed, dated, and signed by a supervisor or responsible party within a reasonable time after those records are made. So we will dive into that a little bit more as far as exactly what that looks like and more specifically what you need to have as far as records go.
Okay, great. So I'm going to jump right to this new form. And this is hot off the presses. I literally just got this yesterday. I know that you guys have been working on this qualified end user exemption worksheet because it's something that there has been some generic ones out there on the internet in different states and doing different things. But this seems to be exactly what the state is asking us growers to do to be able to prove that we're qualified exempt, correct?
Yes, and when I talked about that annual review, if the Indiana Department of Health contacts you and needs to review your qualified exemption status, this is the form that they will ask you to fill out.
Okay, so let's walk through this form really quick because you explained it, you just explained it, but let's walk through the actual form here, okay? So
Yeah.
it looks like the top's pretty simple. You just put your name and address and the year. And you were talking about that you had to have this for you have to prove 3 years averages. So if you got inspected in 21, you'd have to have 20, 19, and 18. So you'd have to have 3 copies. You can't just do the last year, right?
Yes, that's correct. And then each year in the future, you'll do a new form. So next year, you'll do one for 2021.
So basically you just do it every year. Yeah, no problem.
Yep.
So step 1 down here is determine food sales for the farm. And this is where we have the food sales is your aggregate, your total food sales. If you're grain, if you're selling other, value added products on the farm, as well as produce. So that's your total amount of all food, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And that goes right here where I'm hovering. That goes in the total food sale amount. And then you
Yes. And
have below that your total produce, just your produce sale amount.
yes. And so what we're looking for here is we want that total food sale amount to be less than $500,000. And then that total produce sale amount would be above $25,000, just to make sure that you're in the right category here.
Okay, great. And what are some examples of the food that you mentioned? Because people are selling lots of different things on their farms these days.
Yeah, so all of the produce, of course, that you're selling would go into that. Also, if you're making things like jams or jellies or salsas. Also, one that also is counted would be any livestock that you are selling for meat. So even though it might be still a live animal at that point, if you're selling it for meat, then that would also count toward that total food sales. Also beverages. So if you have a winery that you're also making wine on the property and selling that at your farm, that would also count. So lots of different things could fall into that total food sales category.
Okay, great. Let me throw a boomerang in here. What if you're a co-packer or an aggregator or someone who's buying in other things and then selling them to your customers, either through a farm stand or your own CSA or what have you? Does that count as your food sales?
Yes, that also counts. Yep.
Okay, so basically anything that's going through the door that's food goes under the total food sale amount.
Yes, that's correct.
And then produce is pretty clear there. Yeah. So if you don't have all that stuff, these two numbers would be the same. If you're just selling produce, that's it. Your
Yep.
total food sale and your total produce sale would be the same. Okay, let's go to step 2, and we're almost done, everybody. Whoop, too fast. So step 2 is determine the amount of food sold to qualified end users, and that's direct sales to consumers at any location. That's your farmers markets, your farm stands, CSA, subscription boxes, market wagon, the internet, any which way is direct to a consumer. And then also is a restaurant or a retail food establishment. It's kind of like a grocery store that's located in the state or within 275 miles of your farm. So that's a qualified end user, right?
Yes. And what we're looking for here is we want that to be greater than 51%, or I'm sorry, greater than 50%. So the majority needs to be going direct to that qualified end user in order to be eligible for this exemption.
Okay, great. Great. Is there anything, what's on the next page here? Let's see. Oh,
Yep.
okay.
Next page is pretty straightforward as well. Just have to list what produce you're growing.
Okay, great. Could you attach a crop list? Because usually crops can go on and on and on some farms.
Yeah, that would be something I would just ask the Indiana Department of Health if you could just attach that list as part of this document.
Great, great. Anything else, Terry, on this form?
Nope. If you scroll down a little bit, so you have the modified requirements that we just talked about, the modified labeling requirements. And then at the bottom, you do have to sign and date when you did this annual review. That's a very important part of this as well. Got to make sure that this was reviewed and you're certifying that this is all correct. Now, where this gets complicated is, okay, yeah, you have to do this form, but you also have to have supporting documents to show where your sales went. So that could be things like receipts or tax documents or whatever you have on hand to show what you sold and when and where. So one question I get sometimes from people that sell at like farmers markets is, do I have to have a record of every single person that comes up to my booth at a farmers market on a Saturday? And you don't need that. What you need is the date, how much you sold, and where you sold it. So if you sold $500 worth of produce on April 23rd at the Lebanon Farmers Market, then that's what you will put.
Yeah, so basically your basic bookkeeping records would suffice, like your deposits and all of your sales invoices and receipts and any sort of records you keep on cash sales.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. Well, I think we've covered today's topic really well. Is there anything else you want to add? I just kind of want to sum up, but I want to give you a chance to share any parting words.
So if you're going through this and you're as a farmer or a grower and you're confused and not 100% sure if you're qualified exempt, I always tell the growers that they can reach out to the Indiana Department of Health and the food safety farm consultant for their region. So that would be the person that actually has to do this review down the road anyway. So before you start, trying to find all these records and do all of this stuff, if you want to reach out to them and confirm that you are covered or you are qualified exempt, and they can also walk you through exactly what documentation they're going to be looking for. They can provide these worksheets and go through all of that with you. Like Nathan said at the beginning, they are very helpful. They're here to help, not just regulate. It's educate before and while we regulate. So the Indiana Department of Health, they're just a great additional resource for this qualified exemption.
Yeah, I want to echo that. And that's been my experience as a grower and also as a produce trainer, that there's a really fabulous team in the state that's really helping growers a lot. So Terry, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate kicking this talk series off with this thing on the qualified exemption and what records are needed. Thank you so much. Stay tuned for more talks. Thank you so much.
Thanks.